Well, thank you very much for that, and good morning to everyone from partaking of this from the United States, and a good afternoon to everyone elsewhere. My name is Sandy Carden, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as the Chief Executive Officer of Our Common Destiny. The mission of Our Common Destiny is to unite the Jewish world by increasing mutual understanding between Jews living in Israel and the diaspora, and advancing a common future for the Jewish people based on our shared values. Our Common Destiny, or Destiny as we call it, is a new initiative that was formed in 2019 as a partnership between the Genesis Philanthropy Group and the Israeli Ministry of Diaspora Affairs under the auspices of the President of Israel. And as we all share common values of securing the safety and well-being of the global Jewish community, in addition to so many other values that we share, we are glad at Destiny to host this session as a means to explore ideas for collaboration between Israel and the diaspora on how to fight anti-Semitism. Let me just take a few minutes to set the scene. It comes as no surprise, given the context of this conference, that anti-Semitism is pervasive and on the rise. We are seeing an increasing trend in anti-Semitic activities across the US, Europe, and around the world. But one thing that is unique that I would like to focus our conversation upon today is that there is a broad range of styles and formats of anti-Semitism, different types, and we need to consider our toolbox for how we, Israel and the diaspora, separately and more importantly together, can work together to face this range of threats. But first, let's highlight what the threats are and what the issues are. First, the trends in anti-Semitic activity in the US are at a historically high level since 2019 and continue through the COVID-19 pandemic. ADL, and we'll be hearing from Sharon Nazarian in just a minute, documented 2,024 anti-Semitic incidents throughout the United States in their 2020 audit. This is the third highest annual measure since the ADL started monitoring anti-Semitic activities in the US 40 years ago. 2019 was the second highest year with 2,100 anti-Semitic incidents. American Jews are noticing an increase in anti-Semitism and are worried about this issue. Half of American Jewry say they witnessed anti-Semitic incidents in the past year. Most synagogues have upgraded their security systems, and the Jewish Federations of North America launched a coordinated, unprecedented effort to increase the safety of community institutions. And this was documented by the JPPI in its annual assessment. During the fighting in Gaza in May 2021, anti-Semitic slurs and attacks on Jews were recorded in central locations throughout New York during one particular pro-Palestinian demonstration. And in July 2021, a rabbi was stabbed in broad daylight in Boston. Very different kinds, very different expressions of anti-Semitism, but all very, very serious and very, very much a problem. In Europe, according to the Jewish People Policy Institute, anti-Semitism was dormant following World War II until about 2000. However, since then, we have seen a steady increase in anti-Semitic activity across Europe. This has led some Jews in Europe to avoid affiliation with Jewish communities altogether. Some notable statistics demonstrating a rising discomfort among Jews in Europe are the following. 71% of Jews refrained from publicly displaying clothing items that could identify them as Jews. 35% refrained from participating in Jewish events. 38% consider emigrating because they do not feel safe. And in 2019, 90% of European Jews reported witnessing anti-Semitic incidents. And beyond open and clear forms of anti-Semitism, there are more nuanced and diverse forms of anti-Semitism today, notably political anti-Semitism and the social media anti-Semitism extremism. Political anti-Semitism comes in a variety of forms: anti-Israelism, anti-Zionism, as hidden forms of anti-Semitism. These political movements focus on Israel as an outlet for their anti-Semitic activities, which are manifest in various tactics to exclude Jews from political activities or ostracizing Jews for various reasons. And in many instances, this leads to verbal and physical abuse. According to the JPPI, there has been an increase in the number of politically motivated anti-Semitic incidents coming specifically from far-left movements that were most recently inspired in reaction to the latest conflict in Gaza. Internet anti-Semitism is also on the rise. Conspiracy theories that spread during the recent Israel-Gaza conflict, during the initial months of COVID, and others which contribute to negative sentiments towards Jews, in which some instances lead to anti-Semitism and lead to violence. Now, today's panel will be divided into two parts. First, we will speak with three guests who are with us today, and I will introduce momentarily. And after our discussion, we will be joined by Nachman Shai, the Minister of Diaspora Affairs, for a one-on-one conversation. But let me just take this few minutes to introduce our very esteemed guests and our panelists. First, Lord John Mann serves as an advisor on anti-Semitism to the British government. A longtime member of the Labour Party, he is also considered to be the leading British voice against anti-Semitism. Lord Mann has been a prominent leader in the fight against anti-Semitism in Parliament for over 15 years and is considered one of the most vocal critics against former leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, who was accused of allowing anti-Semitic sentiments to fester in his party. Rabbi Sachs of blessed memory once said of Lord Mann's appointment as an advisor on anti-Semitism that whilst the need for a position of this nature is deeply concerning, I cannot think of anyone more suitable to fill this position. Thank you, Lord Mann, for being with us today. Our next panelist is Dr. Sharon Nazarian, the Senior Vice President of International Affairs at the Anti-Defamation League and a friend of mine for many years. In this capacity, Sharon heads ADL's work fighting anti-Semitism and racial hatred globally. Dr. Nazarian is also the founder of the Y&S Nazarian Center for Israel at the University of California in Los Angeles and chair of the center's advisory board. Dr. Nazarian testified before the US government on the internationalization of the white supremacy movement and on global efforts to counter anti-Semitism. In 2021, she was a candidate for US Ambassador of the Office to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism within the US Department of State. Previously, Dr. Nazarian taught as an adjunct professor in the Department of Political Science at UCLA. She is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and is involved in a myriad of foreign policy institutions. Dr. Nazarian holds a PhD in political science, from the University of Southern California. And again, thank you, Dr. Nazarian, for being with us. And last but not least, we have Alexander Vershovsky, the chairman of the SOVA Center for Information and Analysis, a human rights NGO and think tank focusing on the development of nationalism and racism in Russia. The SOVA Center conducts international and research work on such topics as nationalism and xenophobia, relations between church and state, and anti-extremism policy. So thank you all for being here again. So let's start with the panelists. I'd like to take a few minutes to ask a question and give you each an opportunity to answer, and let's exchange views between and among ourselves. And let's start with Dr. Sharon Nazarian. Maybe you could say a few things about your work at the ADL and talk about a little bit about that far left anti-Semitism that I mentioned in our opening trends. Dr. Nazarian. Is Dr. Nazarian with us? Well, let's do this. As we're waiting, Alexander Vershovsky, perhaps you could talk to us a bit, seeing how this is also your expertise.
Thank you very much. I deal with this topic on alt-right movement, Russian nationalism, and including anti-Semitism in Russia since mid-90s. Our organization maybe is the major monitoring agency on the issue. I'm sorry, I have to say when I speak in public that our organization isn't listed by our government as foreign agent organization. When we talk about anti-Semitism on post-Soviet space, including Russia, including Ukraine, some other countries, what is unusual and unexpected is that the level of anti-Semitic activity in current days is relatively low. It looks like we live in some trend which is completely opposite to what's happening in the Western Europe and partly even in the Central Europe. For example, in Russia, we practically have no violent hate crimes against persons. There are just several hate crimes against property per year, and maybe one of them per year is something dangerous like an arson. Of course, we have all forms of anti-Semitism in rhetoric, in online, and in some public speech, but officials and official mass media, which are under governmental control, they very rare give a floor to any kind of anti-Semitic speech. And why it is happening like that? Of course, we may discuss it a lot, but just put it briefly, there are several reasons. First is a strong decline of official anti-Semitism of previous Soviet time. And this decline, not even decline, it's never exist anywhere in any post-Soviet country now. Of course, there are maybe some exclusions. Some officials sometimes say something, but very rare. The second point, especially about Russia, since beginning of this century, they switched their attention, let's say, from anti-Semitism and from Jews in general to some other enemies like migrants from the South and East. It doesn't mean that anti-Semitism disappeared, but it's not as fancy, let's say, among them as previously. The third thing is a weakness of radical Muslim trends, which could be anti-Semitic, even in non-Muslim countries. It's true also for Russia, maybe excluding some places in Northern Caucasus. The fourth element is a good relationship with Israel and zero popularity of so-called Palestine cause. I would explain it first again, the weakness of political Islam. But second, not less important, is weakness of leftist group of European kind. And the third, practically no sympathy to Arabs among general masses. And here it's just because of some racist prejudice, which plays, in this case, some specific role. So even some negative incidents which could happen between, for example, Russia and Israel, like, for example, 3 years ago when our Minister of Defense accused Israel that Israeli plane shot down the Russian military plane in Syria. Even in such cases, there is a lot of critiques against Israel, but it doesn't cross the line making these critiques anti-Semitic. And also we have in mind fifth element, it's a general suppression of opposition, including anti-Semitic elements of opposition. That's why when in Ukraine, after events on Maidan, the country became really free from political point of view, it became a safe haven also for alt-right elements. So many, for example, neo-Nazis from Russia moved to Ukraine. But anyway, even in Ukraine, alt-rights, including the somewhat anti-Semitic propaganda, could not get their real place in the political mainstream. Answering the question about left-wing anti-Semitism, I would say that when we talk about Russia, it's first of all about maybe the biggest oppositional party, Communist Party of Russian Federation, but it's not really a left party in the same sense of the word as it happens, as we see it in European countries. It's rather old-style Soviet party, so it's more conservative in Soviet sense and even somewhat nationalist. So anti-Semitic elements, which we really see in this party, they are more about not its left nature, but more about its nationalist nature, I would say. So when we talk about Russia, we cannot talk about anti-Semitism, which could be produced from anti-colonialist or anti-racist discourse, as it happens in Western left trends. Let me give Lord Mann an opportunity. Let me just jump in here and give Lord Mann an opportunity to address this issue, and then I want to come back to you, Alexander, because the picture you paint makes it almost sound like it's a great place for Jews to be living, and I wonder if that's the picture you mean to paint. But thank you, Lord Mann. Can you hear us?
I can hear you indeed. Yes.
Perfect. There, now I can see you. Fantastic. Thank you for joining us so much. And please, if you say a few words and address the same issue of, as Alexander was starting, of the sort of far left anti-Semitism.
No, well, we've identified over the last 2 decades repeatedly 3 forms of anti-Semitism. The traditional anti-Semitism, which we would define as the far right, the Nazi, neo-Nazi anti-Semitism, which we're very familiar with. And the problem there that we see is that despite history, despite all the education, it still exists. And so that remains a concern. And of course, we've seen some appalling incidents of that in recent times. The second is Muslim anti-Semitism, which by definition was not a problem in a country like England historically, because there was virtually no Muslim population. There is now, and that is a problem, and that problem has not been addressed sufficiently directly. And of course, in particular, Islamist extremists purporting to represent the Muslim community have been responsible for a significant number of terror attacks, luckily none in the UK, directly impacting the Jewish community as a community, unlike elsewhere in Europe and in the US, but that remains a significant issue for government and, of course, the Jewish community. And that's a new problem, not new as in this year, but new as in our lifetime. The third is left-wing anti-Semitism, which is described as the new anti-Semitism, but of course was around in England 100, 120 years ago, very prevalent then, disappeared for 30, 40 years after the creation of the State of Israel, but has resurrected. And we've had a huge battle in knocking this back, I think with great success. They're now back on the fringes, the margins of society, rather than near the mainstream. But the ground war continues to clear them out of all institutions in the political sphere and in the universities and elsewhere. So there are key priorities, but as well, we've managed to do 2 things in the UK that's different to many. The first is we've made tackling anti-Semitism a cross-political party issue. And that's hugely important, with members of all the main political parties involved. And we've had a unity of purpose there that's proved to be very, very strong and has resurrected as a strength in the last 2 years. The second is we've targeted the universities for specific action, in my view, with increasing success. But the truth is, it will take 4 or 5 years to accurately assess the success of our strategy, because it needs to be permanent. So to draw conclusions now would be foolish and preemptory. And thirdly, general civil society, and in particular, I've pioneered work in sport and especially in football, using the values and the ethics of football clubs and football federations. We have a significant number of major football clubs and 4 leading football federations in Europe who've agreed a full work programme on anti-Semitism, having adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. I'm proud to say that England is in the lead, but we have been rapidly caught up by others, and Germany, Austria, and Italy have made major progress in that area. And I think there is room for a huge expansion of this worldwide, of using our major sports clubs and their reach into communities to show that as I put it, the values of the football club badge, of the football shirt that people like to wear, includes a willingness to challenge anti-Semitism. And that, following the great lead of Chelsea Football Club, who have been the pioneers in England, and Dortmund in Germany, whose work is substantial and powerful, but many more clubs now. This is, I think, a new frontier that we've opened up that others should join in with in football and in other sports.
Do you think that that's very interesting. Do you think that is a response to all 3 types of anti-Semitism, or 1 or 2, or as I said,
it impacts on all 3 without question. And that's what's particularly interesting about sport. We're able to challenge all 3. It's one of the easier ways of challenging traditional far-right Nazi anti-Semitism. But it's also a way of challenging Muslim anti-Semitism and a way of challenging far-left anti-Semitism. And so we've many initiatives, but we already have successes here. So I think we can declare the early successes victories already. I think we will see more. I think we will learn additional techniques, and the spreading of best practice is very high on my agenda. But we have successes already. So this isn't a promise for the future. This is actual delivery of successes already, especially in challenging younger people.
Very, very interesting. Thank you. And I've just been told that Dr. Sharon Nazarian is with us. Can you hear us, Sharon?
Yes, my apologies for being a couple of minutes late. Good morning from Los Angeles.
No, good morning. Well, you're up very early. So thank you very much for joining us. We are just having a conversation. Alexander Vershovsky has shared with us sort of the situation in Russia, which painted a much brighter picture than some of us may have anticipated. And Lord Mann just shared with us the way in which the sports clubs and working through the values of sports is actually apparently making a difference and beginning to make progress in fighting 3 different kinds of anti-Semitism in the UK and in Europe. Perhaps from your perspective at the ADL, you can share with us what you're seeing in terms of, and we're focusing primarily on the far left anti-Semitism, but you're free to address any kind of anti-Semitism, and maybe in the following of the remarks of the 2 speakers of where you're seeing progress. Let's be positive on this call. Let's talk about where we see progress and good things happening rather than dwelling on all the bad things that many of us know about.
First of all, Sandy, thank you so much for having me address this wonderful group this morning. I'm really thrilled to be with you and obviously with Lord Mann and Alexander. What we're seeing in the US, and we have really good data that I can point to right now. So I'll start with a little bit kind of drawing the picture in the US and then talk about hopefully areas of positivity and hope. We, along with Hillel International, just conducted a survey of Jewish students across American campuses. So I'll share some of that data with you, which will give us a little flavor for where we are, because we know that university campuses are really the front line on progressive liberal spaces, and where many Jewish students face the greatest amount of pushback and discomfort, I would say, among all parts of society. Really, campuses are kind of the epicenter of what we're seeing in terms of the rise in anti-Semitism from the left. So some of the key findings, Sandy, I'll share with you. We found that 32% of Jewish college students surveyed personally experienced anti-Semitism in the last year. 31% witnessed anti-Semitic activity. Actually, they witnessed it. And a combined 43% of students either experienced or witnessed anti-Semitic activity. Students who participated in Jewish activities actually were more likely to report feeling safe than those who never participated. So it's interesting that if you're kind of a student leader, if you're active in Hillel, in some ways you feel more empowered, you're more in touch with your Jewish identity, and you have more of a sense of who you are and how you want to manifest than those who are not. So what we have found now, especially since the May conflict between Israel and Hamas, which we really call a watershed moment, Sandy, was a shift in a lot of anti-Semitic rhetoric that's always been there, now getting mainstreamed. And what happened as a result of the May conflict is a lot of the terminology, a lot of the descriptions of Israeli policy now turn into actual anti-Zionist and oftentimes stepping over the line into anti-Semitic rhetoric. And in progressive spaces, what we see is the conflation of kind of the post-George Floyd. I think your viewers know what happened last summer in the US with the killing of George Floyd and the reckoning of the American public with institutional racism in America. That conflation of racial issues in America with Israel-Palestinian issues in Israel is really become a complex and I think very misguided part of the progressive spaces in America. So much so that in many social justice spaces now, Jewish students who want to participate, whether it's for the climate movement, for LGBT rights, for anti-racism campaigns, are asked to what we call check their Zionism at the door. So if Jewish students want to be part of a campaign that is fighting social justice and be Zionists today in America, it is very difficult to do that. So the situation, what we're finding is that with the May conflict, this rhetoric went from beyond campuses into the internet space, into many influencers in America who really had no political background, kind of picking up not only the pro-Palestinian cause, but really the anti-Israel and I would say anti-Zionist cause, so much so that now the word Zionism essentially, or being pro-Zionist, is very quickly equated and replaced with, as you can imagine, being pro-apartheid. So today in progressive circles, Zionism is a dirty word. And as we talk about solutions, we have to kind of recapture that word and take it back and really educate. Because one of the biggest problems we found, Sandy, is really about definitions and understanding terminology. And we think that most people either don't understand what Zionism means or have their own perception or their own definition of Zionism, which is inaccurate. So a lot of the challenges for us at EDL is educating the public, whether it's congressional leaders who use language inappropriately, and I think with very negative effects, whether it's on campuses. We saw 2 weeks ago at an Ohio campus, an LGBT student organization rewrote their charter. And as part of their charter, actually said Zionist students need not apply. So this is a trend that we're seeing more and more take effect. The normalization of anti-Zionism is what we have to be very mindful of. And I think, look, the May conflict did have some positive reactions. Many Jewish students across America who definitely associate themselves, their identity with social justice, had a bit of a awakening, where they saw that their colleagues, their friends who were very much aligned with them on social justice issues were not willing to stand up when, you know, rockets were coming down on civilian capitals in Israel, and at least give some credence to the fact that these are civilians being threatened with their lives. So many Jewish students had a moment of saying, if I'm an ally and I'm standing up for all these other causes, why is it when the rates of anti-Semitism after the May conflict went really high across the world, in London, in New York, here in Los Angeles? You all heard about the incident at a sushi restaurant where Palestinian activists had just left a march criticizing Israeli policy, and then coming in caravans and stopping at a sushi restaurant, asking who is a Jew, not asking what is their, you know, position on the settlements, not asking if they're pro-Netanyahu or anti-Netanyahu, but literally asking who is a Jew, and then punching and, you know, physically assaulting Jewish people who were eating at the sushi restaurant. So when we see that, we have to know that these trends are worrisome. But I think, as I was saying, that many Jewish young progressives realize that on one hand, their Jewishness matters to them. Their connection with Israel matters to them. They're not willing to check it at the door. And also that to have allies and to be part of coalitions has to be two ways. It has to be that we stand up for you, but you also have to stand up for us. And I think this moment of kind of awakening was a painful one. I can tell you, my eldest daughter, who's 27, was one of them. But at the same time, it was a moment of saying, okay, how do we come back to our support for the state of Israel, not for all of its policies, but its existence as a Jewish and democratic state, and how do we help that conversation? So I think there's a lot of important conversations taking place within those progressive circles. I'll stop there.
That's great, thank you. Again, I like the optimism. I know some work at, I guess, Zioness is an organization that's working in that area that is unapologetically Zionist, and maybe think that's an important statement. So Alexander, let's talk about, let you finish up the piece on Russia and perhaps speak a little bit about what you think the state of Zionism in Russia is, and what the sense is in the sensibilities in the community about Zionism.
Thank you. Just reacting to what I've heard from Lord Mann, the problem in Russia is that when I describe these points why we have so low level of anti-Semitism, you could notice that it's more about governmental policy. So we too much depend on the position of the government, not on the activity of the society itself, not talk only on activity of Jewish community, but generally on any people, activity of any people who would be against anti-Semitism. So I'm not sure are we really ready to oppose anti-Semitism if it rises for any reasons, and if the government for any reasons just won't pay attention to that. That's potentially a problem. As to Zionism in Russia, it's not seen as an issue like in Europe, as I said, because there are no such popular connotations with apartheid and all this anti-colonialist rhetoric. So it's seen just as something related to Israel, and Israel is a good partner, and even those who maybe have some anti-Semitic prejudice in Russia, interestingly, pay certain respect to Israel as a state. So maybe I would add something else. When we talk about this anti-Semitism in the leftist, or what is called now progressive circles, I mean, not Russia, but mostly Western countries, because we have no such thing here. Of course, there are many anti-Semitic cartoons, and I easily understand why. I think that it's more about new activists who maybe are not experienced, who some organizations, left organizations or human rights organizations, they may rely on, I would call them bad experts. There is peer pressure from other organizations which are relevant for them. And so sometimes they are going, when they criticize Israel, for example, they go too far, not because it's really important for their cause, but to put it simple, because it's fancy in the milieu in which they live. So that, of course, creates a lot of problems, but also gives some hope, because if to keep a dialogue, even with those who somehow cross the line, but not go too far, who are not really anti-Semitic organizations, if keeping dialogue with them, sooner or later, I believe it will help. I think it's maybe just such a period now when a new wave of activists is looking for its place and their position. So if somehow to help them, it may finally would help Israel and Jews too.
Great. Thank you for that. Lord Mann, I'm talking about the difference between the Britain, UK before, while in the EU, and now after the EU. I think recently, I was under the understanding that Britain just recognized Hamas as a terror organization, and I think all of us send our sympathies to the family of Eliyahu K, who was brutally murdered yesterday in Jerusalem, and an act of both terror and anti-Semitism. Other than what's going on with the soccer clubs and the sports, is there a difference in the UK and dealing with this issue as independent versus being part of the European Union?
No, I don't think the European Union exit and Brexit creates some different complications, some of which are still being resolved, but it doesn't alter the basic approach of government or of the Jewish community. It alters how a few of the challenges are dealt with. But that's primarily, I would say, in terms of criminal law, so border controls, for example, and our approach to global issues, the most notable being the internet, where we're making our own legislation rather than waiting for European Union legislation. I think probably our legislation will be tougher. The Jewish community would be pleased if it is. I think we'll probably go further than other countries.
Interesting. So I see we've been joined by Dr. Nachman Shai, the Israeli Minister of Diaspora Affairs. What I would like to do at this point, I would like to thank our panelists very much for your participation and for your thoughts on the panel. I encourage you to stay and to listen to my discussion with Dr. Shai. We thank all of you for your participation today, and frankly, from my perspective, for what seems to be some good news on the front as we think about the fight against anti-Semitism. And it's not so often that we hear positive things about it. And I thank you for bringing the little rays of sunshine. And of course, we all have tremendous work to do to continue combating anti-Semitism and extremism in every form. So thank you all, and kol hakavod to all of you for your work in this important subject. So thank you for being with us. And again, as I say, you're welcome to stay as I have a conversation with Dr. Nachman Shai, who it's good to see again. We participated yesterday on an internet panel, and I like seeing you, Dr. Shai, every day. It makes me feel good and know that someone is out there working for the Jewish people 24/6. I also want to say that I mentioned just as you came on that you may have just recently come from the funeral of Eliyahu K. We're all very saddened by that, by his loss and the loss of his family, and just very deeply touched by that. And of course, it lends itself of this, even though, excuse me, we put it under more of a category of a terror attack. It is also at the same time, of course, an anti-Semitic attack, and a sharp reminder of the challenges, and particularly in Israel, of this issue. So thank you. For those of you who are on this call who are unfamiliar with Dr. Shai, he's a longtime politician and served as a member of the Knesset for the Kadima Party from 2009 to 2013, and from the Labor Party from 2013 to 2019. Minister Shai also has extensive experience in Israeli media, serving in various senior portfolio positions, including with the Israeli Broadcasting Authority. He served as the IDF spokesman and was known by all Israelis for his ability to bring calm to Israeli households during the tense period of the Gulf War. He earned his PhD in political science and communications from Bar-Ilan University. And throughout his career, Minister Shai has had vast exposure and experience in and to Jewish communities of the diaspora. He was a research fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He was in the Foreign Ministry of Israel. He was press secretary to the Israeli mission to the UN, and he did work as a senior vice president of United Jewish Communities, which was the organization that preceded JFNA, Jewish Federations of North America. We in the diaspora are very fortunate to have someone of Dr. Shai's stature and experience in the role as the Minister of Diaspora Affairs, given his extensive knowledge and experience with our communities throughout the world. He's a good friend, and we at Our Common Destiny see him as a critical partner in the mission to advance Israel-diaspora relations. So good afternoon, Dr. Shai. Thank you for joining us. We know that you have very early on in your tenure as a minister chosen anti-Semitism as an area in which you would like to demonstrate leadership. You think it's important. Tell us a little bit why you think it's such an important subject for the Minister of the Diaspora, since your predecessors really did not engage so much in this kind of work.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you for your introduction. I feel lucky. I talk to you every day now, which is
exactly.
Which tomorrow we're going to talk again. I don't know about what, but we'll see. We'll see how things develop. Good afternoon, everyone. I made the anti-Semitism I put it much higher in my agenda because this is a phenomena that Israel, in my view, hasn't dealt enough with, hasn't paid attention. I can understand why, but I totally disagree with that. Why? Because anti-Semitism doesn't play a major role in Israel life. I mean, we have terror, and sometimes terror comes under the title or the label of anti-Semitism, but mainly it's motivated by national feelings. That it was unfortunately the tragic death of Eliyahu K. yesterday in Jerusalem. It was assassinated by a Hamas member of the Hamas political branch, and he was killed right away after by police officers, and we are now taking again action against the Hamas. So the Hamas, by the way, according to the British government, as you probably follow, over the weekend, Britain announced that Hamas is now outlawed and was declared terror organization, not only because of his military activities, but because of political activities as well. Sometimes some governments try to distinguish between political and military activities, but in this case, and also they label openly and clearly that the Hamas is anti-Semitic organization, and so and terror, and both terror and anti-Semitic. So it all comes in the same complex. I believe that this is our role as the government of Israel, the state of the national state of the Jewish people, to lead the world campaign against anti-Semitism. If not to lead, to be in the first row, to be active with governments, with NGOs, with international organizations, to participate in any international conference, to instruct our embassies and consulates all around the world to follow anti-Semitic phenomena or signs of or expressions of anti-Semitism online in the public sphere, to make it as a major goal in the foreign ministry, and the foreign representatives of Israel, because this is the Jewish state, because this is even if there is no anti-Semitism in Israel, which is clear why not, but it is something which troubles and engages people, Jewish people all around the world. And since I believe we are one nation and one people, whatever concerns you should concern us. Whatever troubles you should trouble us. That's what it means, solidarity. That's all about Jewish solidarity. And I feel that my government, the government that I sit in, should take, as I said before, a major role, more active, and to allocate more financial resources and more human resources for that matter.
No, well, thank you. And we certainly talk about it at Our Common Destiny, how we share a common destiny. Right. There's so much that we share. Let's try and get, maybe there are a few specifics you can share with us without telling us too much. So one place where I'm particularly interested is in fighting internet extremism. We know that Israeli companies are very, very highly ranked in the technological world and advancing technology. Are there things that may be going on in Israel? The government's working with some Israeli technology companies to think about how to fight anti-Semitism and other forms of extremism on the internet? Yes,
we did mobilize the Israeli high-tech companies, at least one that we hired for, to be kind of monitor the networks, the social media networks, and to locate anti-Semitic posts, messages, and we've done it successfully. So we, by monitoring the system or the systems, we can point out that there is a huge rise, for example, a spike of anti-Semitism in the past 2-3 years. Some of them should be related to the COVID-19 that somehow the Jews were blamed for, or the Holocaust served as a source of images for the Corona, the public combat around Corona, something trivialization of the Holocaust was done again since the Corona broke out, and again, as I said before, we are now dedicate more in terms of financial resources to move to the second stage, not only to monitor the system, but to find a way how to combat anti-Semitism on the networks. We are there. It is a challenge, and we engage our best high-tech companies and pay them for that. They don't do it voluntarily, but this is the mission. We are very careful because it's a matter of influencing the traffic, and we have to do it publicly. And I'm going to say it publicly. We would like to move the anti-Semitism, the combating anti-Semitism from the public sphere to the online sphere, to this world as well. We will be able to do it. It will take time. And I'm here to alert and scare those guys who use the social media networks to deliver anti-Semitic messages, that they are going to be confronted soon, by the companies themselves, because we have been doing that a lot. I mean, we turn it to the companies and we ask them to remove those anti-Semitic messages, and they do it once in a while. But secondly, we will find out who they are, and then find the ways to remove those messages from the social media system. And that's something new. We will be there. It will take time. I'm telling you openly, we'll do our best to combat anti-Semitism. We'll do our best legally, openly, publicly, transparently. There are no secrets here. And I would like to say, we are not going to tolerate any anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic expressions, and anti-Holocaust denial. And we'll do our best to find the people involved and to expose them and to show, to publish their names and addresses, so everyone will know that those are the guys that are trying to either deny Holocaust or deny anti-Semitism, or just the opposite, pushing anti-Semitism through the social media network that are now available to everyone everywhere.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's wonderful news to hear. I think it points out as Israel grows and matures as a country over time, bringing the power of a nation state to issues that concern the Jewish people globally. And that's an interesting conversation on a general level about ways to do that. But it's inspiring to hear the way you speak about what the government of Israel can be doing in the area of anti-Semitism. I think it's an analog for other areas which are not as contentious. Israeli Jewish education, for example, kinds of things where using the power of the government, bringing that to the benefit really of the Jewish people is quite interesting and quite exciting. Now, to that end, you've spoken publicly about the need to create a new public channel of communication between Israel and diaspora Jewry in order to discuss topics that affect the global Jewish community. And you and I have spoken about this and privately as well. You've highlighted anti-Semitism as a key priority for reasons you just addressed. Others have agreed with you in different fora. JPPI made a recommendation. What platforms exist today to really enable close collaboration between Israel and the diaspora to tackle these challenges? And what plans do you have for platforms in the future where we may be able to increase communication between the diaspora and Israel?
I would say, thank you, Sandy. I would say immediately that there is no any forum that all the players, I would say, the governmental, the third sector, the civil sector, Israelis, non-Israelis are sitting together and planning their strategy. There's no forum like that. Well, there is one, the Global Forum for Combating Anti-Semitism, but that's not a working forum. That's much more of the ideological forum that we raise some ideas and so on, but it's very theoretical, I would say. We would like to introduce a new branch, a new government authority in our ministry, but as I said before, but with a much bigger budget and government facilities to carry a certain central system that will include all the Israeli players, the governmental ones. At least we start with the governmental and non-governmental one, those in Israel. I mean, the Yad Vashem, universities, there's more than one that have anti-Semitism centers combating anti-Semitism. We have few government ministers, the Justice Ministry, the Foreign Ministry, our ministry, and others, so on and so forth. Each one is doing a great job, but separately. And I believe in centralized system. I believe that everyone should sit along the same table and raise idea and to discuss ways how to combat anti-Semitism. When you work together, it is much different than everyone is doing his best, but separately. Israel hasn't had this authority or governmental body so far. And it's time to start that process. I talked to the Prime Minister about that. He agrees. He knows that this is something that can be done, should be done. This is, again, as I said before, this is the Jewish state. This is the state of the Jewish people. And if we don't do the job, who should do it? states are looking at Israel and asking themselves, what are you doing to combat anti-Semitism? What do you want from us if you don't do it yourself? And if Europe, the European Union, has just introduced a 10-year strategy how to foster Jewish life on the one hand in Europe, and on the other, how to combat anti-Semitism, being honest with you, we don't have a 10-year plan. We don't have a 5-year plan. We don't have a 1-year plan. I mean, we do what we have to do, but that's not a plan. That's not a strategy. So that's why I feel that we have a certain responsibility and something that I should do as soon as possible to change the basic attitude of the government of Israel towards anti-Semitism. And I'm going to do that, I promise you.
Thank you. Then you have a big job, and anti-Semitism is one piece of it. What are the other priorities that you have in your office that you'll be working on the next several years?
Well, apart from anti-Semitism, of course, we took a different approach to the denomination, to the 3 denominations, by stating that every denomination is going to be equally treated by the government, by the state of Israel. None of them has any priority on the other. And that's not a simple matter, as you know. And this also had some practical implications when it comes to the Kotel, when it comes to state allocations. We are going to build a new branch in our office that will deal with pluralism, Jewish pluralism, and we will encourage Jewish pluralism, and we'll allocate some funds for that matter with the Reforms, Conservative, and even with the Orthodox. There are also renewed ways for the Orthodox movement, and we would like to encourage them. There's a certain amount of money that was already is in the state budget, which just been approved by the Knesset. We are very well there, and we want to start by introducing this new branch in our office, and plus allocating money right away for the Reforms, Conservative, even the Orthodox, and a number of Israeli NGOs, around 40, that will be able to enjoy this new attitude. When it comes to the Kotel, I insist, and my party as well, and some other parties in our coalition are joining in, that we will finally be able to implement the Netanyahu's outline. The Netanyahu's outline is the one for 2016 that was approved by the Knesset, but finally was not implemented, and then it was suspended and suspended and suspended. It's time to return to the original outline, to implement it, and to let every Jew, men and women, to have their own corner along the long Kotel. There is enough room for everyone. We are not here to dictate to anyone in what way they will engage with God. They want to do it next to the Kotel, they'll do it in the place that they can daven and pray together, men and women, in an equal area. And then in the other one, there'll be separation. This is the principle. So one area, the southern one, will be dedicated to the Reform and Conservative movements, and everyone can come and enjoy that corner. And on the other side, which is quite famous, for the northern side, will be done orthodoxly. But that's fine. That's the way it should be done. I wish it will be all open for everyone, but since there are still some religious differences between one denomination and the 2 others, that's what we plan to do. I hope we'll be able to approve it in the government soon. This is our demand. This is what we are pressing for, and hopefully we'll win this minor battle.
Yeah, thank you. It's very refreshing to hear that, certainly for those of us in the diaspora who practice our Judaism or reserve our Judaism through a different denomination. It raises the question, I think you touched on it, what kind of responsibility do you believe the Israeli government has to diaspora Jewry as it takes decisions that it makes as it regards to some internal and even some external issues? That the impact, the nature, we all understand that we're all interrelated, and perhaps more interrelated today than ever before. That's all of humanity, not just the Jewish people. and that as they say, every action has a reaction. So when something is done in Israel, it has an effect on diaspora Jewry. What kind of responsibility do you think the government should have with regard to the Jewish people worldwide? And among your colleagues, who thinks about that as these decisions are taken?
Well, I believe in a new paradigm between Israel and the diaspora. For quite a number of years, I would say, for quite a number of generations, it was one-way communication from the diaspora to Israel. We encourage Aliyah, and we encourage the financial support, donations. Everything was done from the Galut, from the diaspora to Israel. But now I believe in mutual relations. I believe that it's time for us to give, not only to get. And we can, and we should, and we should. Israel is strong economically, militarily. It's a fact. No one can challenge Israel any longer. Neither military, no politically, neither diplomatically. We are there. And now this new Israel, it's still new, should look at the diaspora and ask our brothers and sisters, who are 8 million of them living out of the country, what do you need from us? How can we help you? So anti-Semitism was one issue that we already discussed. It's a matter that we are able and we can do more than we have been doing. And secondly, now we would like to have to help educational institute. We would like to help the students, young American Jews and neither nor American Jews, but young Jews all around the world, that we believe that we can reach out to them and help them to practice Judaism. Sometimes we have to teach them what Judaism is all about. And we've been doing it, allocating again scores and scores, or even I would say hundreds of millions of shekel for that purpose. We're working with Hillel and Chabad and Olami in the States and out of the United States. We are in process of, we are engaged in Limud FSU, which is also a famous organization organizing seminars on Judaism for former citizens of the Soviet Union who immigrated out of the country and now live in the United States or in Israel. We help Momentum, which brings to Israel huge number of women from the diaspora to visit the country for a week, similar to Taglit. Of course, we are involved in Taglit, we are involved in Masa, we are involved in all kinds of Israel experience programs. We are now trying to figure out whether the teenagers, between 14 to 18 should be a target group for us as well. We encourage Jewish leadership in many ways. There's a variety of projects based usually on matching between us and other foundations or philanthropists to figure out what we can do. The challenge is huge. I believe that we should do two things at the same time. Jewishness on the one hand, how to be a Jew, and on the other hand, Zionism. What does Israel mean to young Jews or Jews as a whole all around the world? What does it mean? And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. We are watching the kind of propaganda of other nations, of other states, of other hostile organizations towards Israel. And we would like to clear the air and to explain to young American Jews, or not necessarily, again, Americans, but young Jews around the world, that Israel is a state of social justice. Israel is a diverse society. Israel is a state of law and order. Israel is a democracy. Israel has a Supreme Court. Israel has elected government, elected president, and so on and so forth. Those very facts that are extremely important and let people to identify with us are not necessarily open and clear and known to those young generation, new generation. And I would like to reach out for them because I would like to raise young Jews all around the world being close and associated with Israel. Last but not least is a question of intermarriage, of the very fact that we are losing day after day many young people. They marry their loved ones, which is fine. We are not going to tell them what to do, but we are trying to, first of all, to help them to make up their mind. But secondly, to focus on their children. even if they marry a non-Jew, which is fine, this is their own decision and I will respect it, at least what are they going to do with their kids? Will they send them to Jewish school? Will they give them Jewish education? I don't want to lose the entire generations in terms of their Jewish identity. So we are very much involved in that. So you see, the challenge is so huge that I have no time to sleep at night. And I'm just waiting for the next call with you, asking myself when Sandy is going to talk to me tomorrow.
Tomorrow,
Yeah.
yes. The challenge is great. And to follow up on our conversation yesterday, there's still that last category, which I think is what do we do together? We have the roles and responsibilities that diaspora has as it relates to Israel. What the state of Israel has to the diaspora, but what are those things that we can do together as the Jewish people to help civilization, to help the world, to continue being a light into the nations that we have for millennia. And that's a whole nother area in which there's huge opportunity. There are also challenges, of course, and there'll be a need for resources. And I've heard you speak to that. Maybe you can just say a couple words on your view of finding some cooperative ventures. I know that predecessors of yours in the ministry have talked about and pushed that would have Israelis and diaspora Jews working together to making the world a better place.
Well, one of the challenges, there's no shortage of challenges, is how to educate the Israelis about the diaspora and the importance, the relevance of the diaspora to their life. 78%, 3/4 of the Israelis were born in Israel. So diaspora for them is sometimes literature. Sometimes it's just news media reports. It's not something tangible that they can think of. The generations of Israelis that had relatives living out of the country are going down. Of course, those who make Aliyah still have relatives, but in general, when I look at my family, that we had at the time relatives in East Europe, then in America, but most of them passed away. So it's all about Israel now, which is growing very, very fast, as you know. But then the question is, it's not only about youth, and it's about us. What do we do with young Israeli generations that have no idea what diaspora is? It's not just about visiting a shul here or a shul there as a monument. The fact is, do they really share the same feeling of peoplehood? One nation, one people, one nation. Half of the nation lives in Israel. Half of them of the people lives out of Israel. What do we have in common? We have to build it. It's not natural any longer. We have to bring Jews together from here and from there. That's like the story of birthright. Some people say, let's do reverse birthright. Let's send Israelis to visit Jewish Federation, Jewish communities abroad. Let them test what it means to be a Jew out of Israel, which is not, which for you is a fact of life. But for us, it's something new that we are not familiar with. So we are doing, again, a variety of operational projects here in Israel, using mass media, using public leaders, using the educational system, the military, the police, and others, just to build the same sentiment that we hope very much still exists in the diaspora towards Israel, that will be applied here in Israel to the Israeli diaspora relationship.
Well, great. And then again, thank you.
Yeah.
Please finish.
No, it's not a simple matter. It's not because we have our own business here. We have a state to run. And you can imagine that when Israeli men or women wakes up in the morning, they have other things on their mind. And if it's not a tragedy, if it's not a shul that was attacked by a terrorist or a certain other Jewish tragedy out of Israel, they don't pay attention. We have to run our own business here, everything like a state. And so there's no much attention left. And I would like to rebuild this attitude and to say to them, just watch what's going on out of the country, Jewish life all over the world, where Jews are, what kind of life they have, what are their concerns, what are their issues, what are their challenges, what does it mean to be a Jew in Hungary or in Ecuador, or in Chile, or in Thailand? What does it mean to be a Jew there? And what makes us all one nation, one people? You can imagine how
exactly. Yes, and that's why we at Our Common Destiny, and speaking for all of us in the diaspora, are extremely pleased to see you in the position of Minister of Diaspora Affairs. We say kol hakavod for the changes in perception and changes in direction that you've already brought to the ministry. And we wish you nothing but strength as you continue to pursue your efforts on behalf of diaspora Jewry and the Jewish people. And again, on behalf of Our Common Destiny and everyone, thank you so much for your time today. Toda Rabbah, and we wish you a Chanukah Sameach. May you enjoy a good Chanukah. And again, thank you for your participation. And yeah, I'll call you tomorrow, but privately, maybe not in front of all these people. Okay.
That's very kind.
Thank you very much. Okay, sure. Okay. Thank you for Letrot.
Toda Rabba. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.